Hi, I'm Scott Leadingham. Thanks for joining us here in the unique Northwest. Coronavirus is on the menu in the news department, but there's other stuff going on out there, and we're going to sort through some of what's going on in the state of Idaho. And joining us to talk about that is Kevin Richert of Idaho Education News. Thanks for joining us today, Kevin.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me.
So, like I said, coronavirus is the main course back in the news, and a little bit of an appetizer, though, as it relates to a ballot initiative on the agenda that people are trying to get on the ballot in Idaho this November. And it's about education, but of course, there's a little bit of a coronavirus connection to it. What is with Reclaim Idaho's push for this education funding measure in Idaho?
Well, you're right. Every story is a coronavirus story in 2020, and this one definitely is. So Reclaim Idaho is a citizens group that pushed successfully for Medicaid expansion and got a Medicaid expansion initiative passed in 2018. Their focus this year is on education funding and an initiative that would increase income tax rates for wealthy Idahoans and for corporations and put the money, and we're talking about $170 to $200 million per year, so quite a bit of money, into K-12, into any number of K-12 programs. Reclaim Idaho started gathering signatures last fall. They were proceeding along in March. They said they were right on pace to have enough signatures to qualify for the ballot in time for the state's April 30th deadline, and then March, and then coronavirus arrived in Idaho. And the group suspended face-to-face signature gathering, which is the only mechanism that's allowed under state law. If you're going to do an initiative, you have to physically get signatures on paper petitions. Reclaim Idaho says that they went to the state and said, what can we do as a plan B? We can't do face-to-face signature gathering in a pandemic. They say that the state rebuffed those attempts, so they filed a lawsuit, Reclaim Idaho. They went to federal court and said that the state is infringing upon the group's First Amendment rights. Federal district judge sided with Reclaim Idaho and laid out a plan that would allow online signature gathering and give the group until late August to complete online signature gathering. That's where it stands right now. 2 federal courts have sided with that schedule, but the state has gone to the US Supreme Court and has asked the highest court in the land to step in and put a stop to the online signature gathering, which is going on as we speak. So this has now gone into 3 levels of the federal judiciary. Reclaim Idaho is gathering signatures. They say that they've gathered about 5,000 signatures in the past week. They need to get about 30,000 by the end of August to qualify for the ballot in November. And the signature gathering is almost a sidelight to the federal court maneuvering that continues. A federal court will hear an appeal in August. That's separate from whatever this US Supreme Court winds up doing.
So Governor Brad Little, it can be said, is not a fan of this process or of the proposal to increase some taxes to pay for education. So beyond that, though, let's back up. What is the education funding initiative intended to fix? This infusion of cash, if it were to get on the ballot, if it were to pass, what is the intended hole that is trying to be filled if it were to pass? I'm sure every school district can say, yeah, we'd love to have more money. I mean, I think few people would argue that schools don't need more money in some way. But is there an X or a Y thing that the state school leaders have said that they need this money for?
It's a menu of programs, Scott. So if this were to pass as Reclaim Idaho envisions, you would collect these added income taxes. And again, we're talking about $170 to $200 million each year. That money would go into a lockbox, if you will, and it would go into a dedicated fund for K-12. And from there, it could be used for any number of things. You could use it to increase teacher salaries, hire more teachers so that you can reduce class sizes. You can put some of this money into all-day kindergarten, which some schools have established, but the state only funds a half day of kindergarten. So if a district wants to go from half day to full day, they have to come up with a difference. This Reclaim Idaho money could be used for that purpose, could be used for career technical education. So it's a variety of different programs that the money could go into.
All right. Speaking of schools, which of course you cover at Idaho Education News, whether that funding measure gets on the ballot is still yet to be seen, and still yet to be seen as well in Idaho and heck all over the country is whether schools will be opening in just a few weeks. And so, where you sit there in Boise and you cover education, how is the state approaching that question mark of how and whether schools will reopen in Idaho?
The state is taking more of an advisory approach this time around. Now, if you go back to last spring, the State Board of Education effectively closed schools across the state. This time around, Governor Brad Little and the State Board of Education have issued guidelines. Now, make no mistake, the governor and the state board all say that they expect to see schools reopen. That's the goal, that's the expectation. But as for how that looks and whether that actually happens, they're leaving that decision to local school officials, working with local health districts. But we're already seeing signs that it's going to look different from one district to the next. Just this week, the Caldwell School District, that's a district in Canyon County, it's about a half hour from Boise, but right in the middle of the Treasure Valley, right in the middle of the metropolitan area that's seeing huge increases in coronavirus cases. Caldwell District announced just this week that it's going to delay the start of the school year by a week. And when that school year starts in late August, it's going to be a hybrid model. Kids are going to spend a couple of days in class. They're going to spend a couple of days working from home and working remotely. And Wednesdays all across the district, and this is a district with about 5,000 students, Wednesday is going to be digital day for K through 12. No in-school sessions for any students. So that's significant because, to my knowledge, that's the first large district in the state to come out with a plan that incorporates blended learning. I don't think they'll be the last.
Well, you and I talked in March when this was all sort of ramping up about some of Governor Little's maybe reluctance, if that's the right word, to make drastic statewide action. It really sort of played into his bread and butter as a Republican who didn't want to take too drastic of measures from a statewide perspective. And so he sort of really deferred to the local school districts to make those decisions on their own. And many of them ended up closing on their own before the state actually stepped up and made that decision. So I now wonder, about 4 months later, on the other end of things, when we're talking about schools potentially reopening for the fall term, is Governor Little sort of talking about giving the same amount of deference to local districts to make those decisions whether and how to reopen? Or is he sort of saying, no, I really think it would be good if all students get back to school?
I think to some degree he's trying to have it both ways. He's definitely made it clear that he expects schools to open, he wants schools to reopen, but he's leaving that decision to local officials. So I think what you saw in March was the governor looking at the CDC guidelines that said, don't close schools too quickly, too early in the pandemic. So that was his advice to local school administrators. That was largely unheeded by local school administrators who were getting a lot of pressure at home, a lot of pressure from parents and teachers, and closed quickly. So by being fairly risk averse and being fairly measured, I think the school closing issue overtook the governor in March. And I suspect and I sense that the same thing is happening right now. He's taking a very measured approach to reopening. He put together a task force to work on guidelines to help schools navigate the reopening process. Well, what's happened? June 17th, he created this task force. At that point, Idaho had 3,600 confirmed or probable coronavirus cases. And the numbers weren't increasing that much. They were fairly steady. The state was proceeding along reopening businesses and proceeding along then towards reopening schools, and things seemed to be fairly much in control. Well, the numbers have exploded since then. As we sit right now, Idaho is close to 16,000 cases of coronavirus. The numbers have quadrupled in just about 5 weeks. So I think the numbers and I think the public concern about reopening schools, I think that threatens to overtake the governor politically on this issue. I think you've got teachers and parents who are very concerned about the reopening. And it's anecdotal. I mean, it's comments we get on our Facebook feed. It's comments that we're seeing. It's feedback that's coming up in hearings. But I get the sense that there's a lot of concern about the reopening and a lot of concern about why is the governor pushing for a reopening at all at this point, or expecting a reopening at all at this point.
What, if any, role is the state legislature playing in all this? I note that a lot of his own fellow Republicans were fairly critical about some of what they considered to be drastic or draconian measures throughout all of this. His own lieutenant governor famously was pushing back against him. But now going forward into the fall and the school year and a potential legislative session, whether that be a special session or just the regular 2021 session, what are they trying to do? Are they trying to rein him in or curtail his executive authority in any way?
I think the legislature right now has taken a fairly hands-off approach. But if there's one thing that legislators are talking about and looking at as a possibility, is legislation to address the civil liability of reopening schools. What happens if a school opens and a coronavirus case, or worse still, a super spreader incident can be linked to a school? Right now, the schools are saying that their insurers are saying, you're not covered. You're on your own. And educators and education leaders are pushing the legislature and pushing the governor to do something about that, to pass some sort of legislation to address the civil liability issue, to put some sort of restrictions, to set some sort of ground rules for a school's liability. That came up on Tuesday when House and Senate Education Committee members met via Zoom, like we all do. Educators are concerned about it. Legislators have heard about that. Governor Little has said he's open to the idea of a special session. If there's one thing that legislators step in and deal with between now and January, when the session is supposed to begin, that would be it. That may not be the only thing that they address, but I think that that's the most likely issue to come up first.
Well, it's all good information. We thank you for joining us to share it with us today, Kevin.
Thank you. Anytime.
See more of Kevin Richert's reporting on these and other topics for Idaho Education News at idahoednews.org. And for more Northwest news, come to our website, nwpb.org. Thank you for joining us here in the unique Northwest.